He says he doesn't want to be prime minister. He's given no clarity on who he wants to form a coalition with. And the other thing that's happened is Wilders, the very right-wing guy, has actually risen in the polls.
Here's a question for you. Paragraph Films. Why do news reporters scream the most ridiculous and unprofessional comments and questions at politicians going in and out of buildings?
Are you going to resign, Home Secretary?
Right, exactly, yeah. and then the more the Home Secretary avoids the question, the more the question comes. Sometimes the question's like, are you a liar?
I don't know. Well, there was a guy... Welcome to the Rest is Politics Question Time with me, Alastair Campbell.
And with me, Rory Stewart.
Now, Rory, let's kick off with something that we're both quite fascinated by, but you're sort of mildly obsessed with, and that's OpenAI, Sam Altman. Redacted, good name for a listener. Following OpenAI's tumultuous weekend, it's raised concerns about the stability and alignment of artificial general intelligence with human values. In light of this, what measures can governments take to ensure that the development and implementation of AGI not only aligns with, but also enhances human welfare and global interests? I mean, what the hell is going on?
Well, so that's the first thing. Nobody knows. It's really amazing. The New York Times has written 5 articles, has thrown every journalist they've got certainly their tech pages at it, and they've basically managed to find out nothing. Sam Altman won't comment. The chair won't comment. The phrase in the just take it back for a bit for listeners. I think most people will understand, but OpenAI is the absolute center of the artificial intelligence revolution. That's the company that produced ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 4. And Sam Altman was the CEO of OpenAI. He created this thing and is therefore one of the most significant tech entrepreneurs, businessmen in the world. And at the end of last week, he was, without any warning, fired by his board, which didn't include the chairman of the board, who also walked out in protest. So the CEO's gone, chairman of the board is gone, and they didn't bother, it seems, to tell Microsoft that it just invested $13 billion in OpenAI, which is, it's $13,000 million they've put into OpenAI, but didn't bother to inform them.
So Microsoft now hired him.
So Microsoft has now, Satya Nadella, who's the head of Microsoft, has now hired him in to be their to run an independent research institute for them. The phrase that keeps being repeated by OpenAI is that he's been fired for lack of transparency in interactions with the board, effectively undermining their decisions. So the idea is that he was getting on with a agenda as the CEO that the board didn't endorse, but it's an unbelievable decision. And the story that people seem to be circling around, whether it's true or not, is that Ilya Sutskever, who is one of the other founders and who's on the board, is worried that he wasn't taking seriously enough the ethical risks around AI, that Sam Altman was beginning to lean more and more heavily into the commercial opportunities. And this, of course, has been a criticism of Elon Musk, who we were talking about in the last podcast. Elon Musk helped to get OpenAI off the ground when it was a charity and has been in a boiling rage ever since, now that it's gone partly commercial with the money coming in from Microsoft. And, of course, is also on the side of the fact that AI is a potential risk. So a lot of this is caught up, it seems, although we can't get to the bottom of it yet, in a frantic disagreement within the community about whether there are moral risks of it. Yeah.
Ilya Sutskever has put out a short statement. I deeply regret my participation in the board's actions. I never intended to harm OpenAI. I love everything we built together and will do everything I can to reunite the company. And obviously this guy, Altman, who I've never met, is clearly very, very popular. There was a sort of massive walkout. This is something that we talked about with Mustafa Suleyman and Reid Hoffman. And essentially, there's this argument between people who think that the whole thing is going to be a catastrophe and who really, really worry that what they're actually doing with the stuff that they're creating. And those who feel that they're more realist which is that this is new technology, but it doesn't pose massive existential threats. And that's where Altman was. And I don't know, it's just sort of, but it does seem extraordinary that they can. It's back to this thing about almost like, despite them being massive, incredibly powerful, wealthy companies, still sort of really behaving like startups.
They're behaving like startups, and there's also a sense of how tiny this world is. I mean, absolutely tiny this world is. I mean, a lot of the people we've been interviewing are on the boards of various of these companies or are the major investors in various of these companies. These are all their friends. So
Mm.
it's got much more of a feeling of, well, I guess, of what it felt like with you when you were coming into office in 97, of a very close group of people who've known each other for 15, 20 years, who basically, many of them were at Stanford together. Sam Altman ran the big venture capital firm, the most famous sort of tech startup investing firm in California before he went on to launch OpenAI. Many
Mm.
of these people, as we've talked about, were at PayPal. So Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, all these people, Peter Thiel, all knew each other when they were setting up PayPal. So no, it's a tiny world. I think the other thing, just quickly, I was having dinner with some very, very interesting international CEOs, so heads of big international companies, American, Swedish, Spanish, etc., and how quickly AI is changing the way they think. They were saying that nothing in 40 years of business they ever seen is having an impact as quickly as AI is.
Mm.
It's changing the way they think about tools. It's changing the way they think about whole functions in their company. Do we even need to have a call center anymore? Do we even need software engineers? And it's also beginning to generate completely different ideas about what a business model can be. And in fact, I think if you were Labour coming in to run the British economy, the great hope would be that AI might actually lead to a real productivity revolution, and that might
Mm.
be the thing that would get growth off the ground again. I think this is something Tony Blair's been trying to say to them.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I think we were both quite pleased that Keir Starmer gave Peter Kyle this job that is sort of technology and innovation, which is clearly, right. This is right at the heart of it. So I think a government that really did have a strategy for that would, it could be the future of growth. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could be amazing. I mean, the problem is, of course, people are very skeptical because there's this great cliche from an economist who said, we see computers everywhere except in the economic statistics, that technology was supposed to, 30, 40 years ago, bring these incredible productivity gains that it
Mm.
never quite seemed to bring. One of the jokes is that you get ever better versions of PowerPoint, but instead of improving your productivity, you just make ever fancier PowerPoint decks. So the question is AI finally going to produce what you want, which is getting more out of the same number of people?
Yeah. Yeah. Now your turn.
All right, here's a question for you. Paragraph Films. Why do news reporters scream the most ridiculous and unprofessional comments and questions at politicians going in and out of buildings? And is there any strategy of answering these without becoming a story? Should the news be able to use these clips? It really grinds my gears. Can you give us an example of some of these questions that they shout? What's the kind of things that annoys him?
Are you going to resign, Home Secretary?
Right, exactly. Yeah. and then the more the Home Secretary avoids the question, the more the question comes. Are you going to resign, Home Secretary? Yeah. Or and sometimes the question's like, are you a liar?
I don't know what. There was a guy who sadly died recently, but his nickname was Gobby, and he was the BBC doorstep guy, and he used to stand outside Downing Street and literally just shout those questions, and it would be. But every now and again, somebody answers. Is the truth,
Right.
or they react in a way that kind of they do something interesting.
But what would be
I
your
imagine
advice to a cabinet minister walking out of Downing Street facing Gobby?
Yeah, but hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Smile and move on.
Right.
But if you think about it, that woman that Johnson made a dame, Andrea Jenkins.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that she's really known for is basically giving the middle finger.
Yeah.
To a bunch of photographers. I bet you that was in response to a Shouty question.
Right.
So
produce the great photograph.
Yeah, exactly. So you might get a reaction. Most of the time, it's a complete waste of time. I mean, the only time that I've really had intense sort of personal media scrutiny was in the build-up to the Iraq inquiry, and we had them outside the house the whole time. And I just decided day one, I'm not going to say a single word at any point outside
Right.
my house,
Right.
and I'm not going to look at them, react at them,
And was
nothing.
it not a bit weird? Because presumably you knew them all. Some of these people will have
Yeah, a
been
lot of them.
friends
Yeah,
standing out there
yeah,
shouting at
yeah,
you.
yeah,
And how does
yeah.
it feel to suddenly find that your friends are now turned into a sort of baying crowd of lunatics on your front door?
The really friendly ones probably wouldn't be baying,
Right.
but they'd be there. But you just have to go into a mindset that says they're not here. It's funny when I when I actually went to the Iraq inquiry itself. I think I might have told you this before. There was dozens and dozens of media, and there were protesters. And the police said to me, the security people said to me, "Do you want to go in the back?" And I said, "No, there's no way I'm going in the back." Um, so I walked through, and I was so in the zone that I wasn't even aware that things were being thrown at me. I just decided I'm going to walk from A to B. I'm going to get to that door. I'm going to go in. Nobody's going to be able to say that I sort of skulked in the back. And I got there, and one of the people who was working for me, she was in tears because she'd seen this thing, and I wasn't even aware of it. Because I just said to myself, I'm going to walk through this now and nothing matters. You don't, so my advice is always don't do anything. You've just got to get in a mindset that says they're not there.
Right.
But you'd be amazed how often Gobby would get a response.
Some kind of reaction with a daft question. Now, Dutch elections.
Yeah.
Bis Ponte. The growth of anti-politics politicians shown in the Dutch new social contract currently topping the polls. Could you discuss the upcoming general election in the Netherlands? Then Johannes, Dutch elections coming up. PM Mark Rutte, not up for re-election. How important is seniority in international relations? Ollie McGlashan. Do you think a new party in the UK could ever have the same sudden and rapid growth in popularity that Peter Omtzigt's NSC party in the Netherlands has had, such that they could pose a challenge to the two main UK political parties? Now, Alistair, I after you brought this up nobly last week and did a bit of Dutch, I, like you, got a few messages from friends in Holland, including a friend who was actually having dinner with Peter Omtzigt at the
Oh,
time
wow.
and sent a photograph. And I think that might mean that if we wanted to interview him on the show, he might be up for it. But
Good.
one of the things was they said that we hadn't properly covered how he came to prominence. And this was an amazing thing called the childcare benefits scandal. So,
Toeslagenaffaire.
oh, very good. Very
How's
good.
about that?
Very
Yeah.
good. That was very impressive.
A child benefit scandal.
Yeah, so a bit like, you can see this a bit with what Jeremy Hunt's doing at the moment, where he's saying that he's going to get tough on benefits. So basically, the Dutch government seems to have gone very, very hard on parents claiming child benefits, suggested that they were fraudulent, demanded that they paid back a lot of money, particularly targeted immigrants, ended up driving a lot of families into hardship. And if I'm right, Peter Omtzigt was the first person to really come out clearly and call this out. And this brought down the government. Yeah.
It was very interesting because we did our bit and we chatted away, and I got lots of emails from people saying, very nice to hear you talk about the Netherlands. I think that you sort of got it right, but there was a big, big, big hole in what you were saying, because they were saying, as you said, that this guy Omtzigt, he's been around for a long time. Basically a kind of, you'd have said a kind of lifetime backbencher, really. And he, on the right, and sort of Labour-ish MP, they basically exposed this scandal. And it led to, I didn't even know about this, to my shame, but it led to lots of people killing themselves. It reminded me, when I read into it, it reminded me a little bit of that post office scandal here, where postmasters were being frankly persecuted over things that they hadn't done. So it was an absolute sort of, let's get tough on benefit fraud, let's go after them. They went after them, this supposed fraud hunt, pursued between 30 and 40,000 people. And of course, then what happened, and this is an email I got from a guy called Paul Barley, and he said that essentially the government tried to cover it up. They were aided in that by lots of what he calls the media oligarchy. And Omtzigt gained huge support because he refused to let the government sweep it under the carpet. And he was essentially sacked, but he kept going as an independent MP. And it really gave him a prominence and a popularity. And so he's now set up this new party, the NSC, which was literally just a few weeks old. But interestingly, I then got another very long email from somebody who said, "You're absolutely right that he's gone to the top in no time at all, but it's really weird because he says he doesn't want to be prime minister. He's given no clarity on who he wants to form a coalition with. And the other thing that's happened is Wilders, the very right-wing guy, has actually risen in the polls. So the latest polls show this guy, Omtzigt, in the lead, Wilders not far behind, and Frans Timmerman, who's leading the Labour Green coalition, he's a little bit behind them.
Now, question from Connor for you. What big policy are all the major parties missing out on? Where is a win being missed?
Europe.
It's the big one, isn't it? I mean, I'd want to reopen at least the idea of customs union. And that's a huge gap in the market. Now, it's something, presumably, could Keir Starmer do it courageously after coming in if he didn't put it in the manifesto, or would he be in trouble if he didn't put it in the manifesto?
I think what you could put in the manifesto is that, the Brexit deal was a disaster. Boris Johnson, who led it, has been exposed as a complete liar and a charlatan. It's doing enormous damage to the country, and we'll have to review our arrangements with the European Union.
Very good.
That's all I would do. But I just don't think they're in the. I don't think they're in the same place. But also, if you're serious about growth, then you're going to have to do something about our relations with our closest neighbour. I was telling you last week about, when the guys that we were talking to in Ireland. I mean, how many of them were saying that, it's been a disaster for them as well as for us. But at least they've now got, they can still trade with the rest of the single market.
So here's my big policy that I love and that everyone thinks I'm barking on. I think a huge citizens' assembly, which could almost be a third branch of government, advisory, so it wouldn't be able to pass laws. But I've got a very interesting friend who's an Australian academic who suggested that what it might be able to do is, if the citizens' assembly, and it'd be like a jury, so it would be people around the United Kingdom, demographically representative, randomly selected, sitting in this assembly for a period. If the government passed a law that the Citizens' Assembly thought was really bad, they could push it back for a second vote, and maybe even a second vote under a secret ballot. So let's imagine, I don't know, that Congress and the Senate had all the Republicans had voted sort of not to impeach Trump. Maybe if you pushed it back under a secret ballot, maybe they'd vote differently. Maybe the same would have been true with getting a soft Brexit through, that if you pushed it back and people could vote under a secret ballot, you might have been able to get a soft
and also,
Brexit through.
although there would be some cost to that, they wouldn't be huge because it's not a big spending thing. There's a question actually, sort of same theme, quality of democracy. Unlock Democracy wants to ask this question. 1 in 7 UK citizens are currently not registered to vote. That's 8 million potential voters in the forthcoming election who exist outside of the UK's democratic processes. Should all parties commit to bringing in automatic voter registration in their manifestos?
Yes, I'd also like compulsory voting. I like compulsory voting.
Where are you on lowering the voting age?
No, I'm against you on that. Partly because I think it's a bit. I mean, we don't want to get drawn down into that, but it's a bit weird because so many bits of our society are about increasing ages from 16 to 18. For example, about your ability to deploy to fight and things like that. So I think that there's some. Anyway, we don't want to get dragged down.
Well, I go to loads of schools, as you know, and I think most kids in most schools know a lot more about politics than an awful lot of 50, 60, 70
It's definitely something I picked up when I was an MP, is if you wanted to be popular in schools, you definitely said you want to drop the voting age to 14. And
the other thing I would do, again, pretty cost neutral, I would take John Major's Nolan principles and I would make them somehow applicable with an outside judge to every single member of parliament.
Ooh. Interesting.
How about that? How
Interesting.
about that?
Gosh, you'd have to set quite a high bar. You wouldn't want the judge interfering every second.
No, exactly. But just the fact of doing it, I think, would
Yeah,
improve
it'd be
behaviour.
interesting. But you'd probably want to set it up with the hope that they would do it once or twice in a parliament for
Yeah,
a really
exactly.
egregious thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah. Yeah. Go on.
here's another one. Sam Dyson, and it relates to the behaviour of MPs. Two questions in one. One, should MPs be allowed to have second jobs that earn more than the standard MP salary? B, should MPs be allowed to work for companies with links to people under UK economic sanctions? And this is about Brandon Lewis, who was not long ago in the cabinet and now is picking up a very large six-figure slab for his relationship with some company that's under sanctions. What do we think of that, Rory Stewart?
Well, I think the key question always with this is conflict of interest. And I think that's what you really need to focus on above all. It's not the amount that you earn, it's whether the company you're working for conflicts with your public role. So that's why the most dangerous bit is the lobbying, getting involved in contracts that touch companies that you've been involved in, all that. That's where the real corruption starts.
But he was part of a cabinet which imposed sanctions post the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean that does seem a bit bizarre. I agree. That does seem a bit bizarre. I don't. Now, one of the big questions we haven't really done. There's a lot of questions about is Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got three questions on Rwanda, and they come from Totsi Flack, Andrew Watt, and Andrew Hosen. So Totsi Flack, would someone discuss the actual cost benefit of the Rwanda plan? So aside from the legal moral injustice of it, I believe it's been incredibly expensive so far. Andrew Watt.
140 million.
There we are. Andrew Watt. If Sunak goes ahead with a law which purports to assert definitively that Rwanda is a safe country, what are the implications of credibility of the king and the monarchy, who has formed to give royal assent to a nonsense IMO? And Andrew Hosen, Rishi Sunak's been telling people he won't let a foreign court block flights to Rwanda. The Supreme Court is a UK court. How can the Prime Minister get away with lying to people? How does this align with his commitment to integrity, professionalism, and accountability? So there we are. So very quickly on the Rwanda thing, and again, this is maybe for people who've not been following it very closely. The broad idea from the government was that people arriving on boats, and in fact, they suggested at some point all asylum claimants in the UK would be shipped off to Rwanda, and their asylum claim would be processed in Rwanda. And the British government gave a significant sum of money to the Rwandan government for the Rwandan government to agree to do this. And the Rwandan government built some quite upscale accommodation, certainly by Rwandan standards. And when I was in Rwanda, a lot of people going to visit it. And I'm sure the Rwandan government was serious about trying to provide decent accommodation for people. The Supreme Court, though, knocked down the government's appeal to try to push ahead with this plan on the ground of something called refoulement. And refoulement is if you believe a country is likely to send the asylum seekers back to their home country. And they believed that Rwanda had a record of refoulement. So this is important because the Supreme Court was not saying that the idea shipping people somewhere is illegal. And that's important because this may be very, very relevant for migrants crossing the Mediterranean. There's a very interesting article by Matthew Said in the Times basically saying the asylum system is fundamentally broken because when it was designed, it was not anticipating hundreds of millions of people to have a legitimate claim to asylum.
Just how crazy this debate has got. I read that Rishi Sunak doesn't like the word refoulement.
Oh.
Because it's a bit French.
Does sound a bit French, doesn't it?
I mean, la foule means the crowds. It's sort of recrowding is what it means.
Wow.
But listen, this whole thing, this is why I think Sunak's in trouble, because when he stood outside Number 10 and said integrity, accountability, all that, professionalism, integrity, accountability, you've got to deliver on that. And what essentially this whole thing is saying is that we don't like the judgment, and therefore we're going to legislate to say that the judgment is wrong by signing a treaty with the country that they say isn't safe, for them to say that they're safe, and then we'll say to Parliament that we're saying they're safe as well, and that's the law.
So this is something that Jonathan Sumption, who you're not always a big fan of, partly because he stood for the Restore Trust group for the National Trust elections, which you've been grumbling about a lot.
Yeah, but I'm mainly a fan.
Mainly a fan. Anyway, Jonathan Sumption wrote a very good piece on this, saying that he has written calling into question the European Court and Supreme Courts, and he's got a lot of sympathy with the government claiming that Parliament is sovereign. But what Parliament cannot do, and what it seems to be suggesting that they might try to do, is to rule on a matter of fact, right? They can pass laws, but it's up to the courts to determine whether a country is or is not safe. You can't just rule that a country is safe. Fortunately, I don't think it's going to happen because we have a very good Attorney General in the form of Victoria Prentice, who's very serious about these things. And I don't think that Victoria Prentice would allow this to happen.
Related to this, Rory, Norma Spark, why is it not in the public interest to publish the full cost of the Bibi Stockholm? This is the floating barge in Dorset, which I saw, by the way, when I was down at that Bridport Book Festival that you don't like me talking about. Rental costs, running costs,
It's
staff
obviously
costs, and cost per
big
head.
thing. I just huge shout out at Bridport. I mean, honestly, you've done more for the Bridport Book Festival than any man on earth. It's amazing.
Are you
what you've
going
done.
next year? They want you to
Well,
go. Do you want to go?
I think I'll have to go now that you've sold.
But
it
then
to me
you
so
can
well.
go and see the Bibi Stockholm. But why you were the prisons minister? What
Yeah.
do you reckon roughly? What do you reckon it would be costing?
A huge amount of money. I mean, usually
Mm.
part of the problem. I mean, it'd be costing many hundreds of thousands of pounds a week to run this thing.
Why do they think that they shouldn't? It's public money. Why shouldn't they publish how much it's costing?
Well,
I think it'll be in
they'll
the
have to eventually,
hundreds
won't
of
they?
millions by now.
Well, they'll have to eventually, won't they? I mean,
I don't know.
the Public Audit Office the National Audit Office will require it. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't get away with not publishing your figures. I can't really understand what this not in the public interest stuff's about. It sounds to me like the government's embarrassed by how much it's spending and it's trying to weasel out it.
We had loads of questions about Rwanda, but the other one that you read out there was about, the cost benefit analysis. I mean, they've, let's just remember, not a single person has been flown. We're already into the 100 million plus territory. It is, God knows what it'll be up to when the legal bills come in. And then they're still determined to go ahead with it. So the costs are only going to rise. And meanwhile, if we do get to an election without it having happened, what a total waste of time and money.
Very good. Right. Now, we've got a final questioning, which is, Max, what books would you recommend to understand the UK political system? Now, there are lots of classics out there, depending on how serious you want to be. So one of the great classics is a book by Peter Hennessy called Whitehall, which goes back many, many years, but is the great sort of investigation of how Whitehall worked. I would be tempted to say Catch-22 is a good insight into it. There's some great books out by obviously James O'Brien, Ian Dunt, Raphael Baer, who of course I recommended last year and then got told off by you because he managed to put on the front of his book that it had been our book of the year. Little plug though for an amazing book, which is quite a serious book, but I think a very, very well observed, wry, inventive book, which is just about to be published, called Late Soviet Britain by Abby Innes. And Abby basically argues that neoliberal economics has become as mad as sort of Soviet economics under Brezhnev, as rigid, as sort of defended in an insane way, and that the way to understand Britain is what she calls an isomorphism. In other words, a sort of weird echo between late Soviet bureaucracy and British economic policy, from Major through Blair to David Cameron and now Rishi Sunak.
Very good, very good. Have I told you about my new book that I've just finished?
You just written another book?
Yeah.
No wonder you're never doing enough work on the podcast. What have you been doing writing a book?
Oh, but get off! Honestly, how many hours research have you done today?
No, not as much as you probably.
It
Although I
is
don't know how much time you spent writing this book. What is this book?
It's a guide to politics for primary schools.
Ah,
So that's going to be a classic.
you see, look at that. I was just, as usual, you've beaten me to it. I was approached by a publisher to write exactly that thing.
Were
and
you?
You've already written it.
Well,
No point my even starting.
Do you know what? I've really enjoyed it though, because it's actually, I mean, obviously my journalistic background is on tabloids where you have to sort of, try and keep to as few words as possible to say quite complicated things. But it's really quite tough to do, the history of Parliament in like 5 paragraphs and that sort of thing. But I've really enjoyed it. And now it's going to the illustrators. It's going to be one of those sort of, lots of nice
beautiful
illustrations and stuff.
What a beautiful idea. Now, okay, that allows me to get in a little plug.
Go
So
on.
I have been involved in making a documentary called Julius Caesar: The Making of a
I
Dictator.
know. I read about it, and
Yep.
that's the first I knew about it. And even though I asked you last week how often do you talk about the Roman Empire, you didn't even mention it.
Well, it's going to be out next Monday on BBC Two at 9 o'clock. I've done it with Tom Holland, the great star of The Rest is History. So this show is my trying to make the case that Julius Caesar was what we mean today by a populist.
Ah,
He is an early play of Donald Trump or Bolsonaro or the figure Milei that's now emerging in Argentina. He's somebody who pretends to be on the side of the people in order to take power and wrecks the entire constitution of Rome to
and what
get
does
what he
Tom Holland
wants.
think?
Tom Holland thinks that Caesar is witty, glamorous, bold, inventive, and that the whole thing is mesmerizing watching. Then maybe that's
He
being a
is
bit
the
unfair to Tom.
he did deliver, or is said to have delivered, or has had delivered through history, the greatest soundbite of all time.
Yes, go on. Give us your soundbite.
Veni, vidi, vici.
It's good, isn't it? It's good. Good,
Oh,
good. It's good.
brilliant.
He also did a lot. He also, put the word July into our calendar. That's from old Julius.
Yeah,
Reshaped the
yeah.
whole calendar. And we're going to have the same debate, of course, around Napoleon. Where again, Andrew Roberts and people are saying, much underrated, did wonderful
Yeah.
things for France, and people like me are trying to line up and say he's a grisly old dictator.
The Ridley Scott film is getting rave reviews in Britain and getting sort of slammed in France.
No.
Um, listen, how did you resolve the argument? Did you do we have a public vote? Did you have a duel? What did you
No,
do?
well, no. I mean, you just watch the documentary, and it's rather beautifully done. The parts of Caesar and Cato are acted out, and we voice over what they were trying to do and what they were trying to achieve and what they thought. I really
Excellent,
enjoyed it. I think so.
excellent.
If you want documentary on ancient Rome, next Monday, 9 o'clock.
Well, all those people who sent me a message last week saying, "Does he really think about Rome?" How many times did you say? 12 a day or something?
Yeah,
I now understand it. That's been a more recent thing, but not all the time. Yeah.
not all the time. No, no.
Okay.
And
Jolly
congratulations on the
good.
book, Alistair, and have a great day.
All the best.